Hey, everybody. Hey,
Hello.
Jim.
Hello. Wait, I told out my daughter, I embarrass her. Hi, Madeline.
Hey, Madeline. Thank you guys for joining us. Please let us know where you are joining from. Let us know in the comments where you're joining from. Last time we had Paris and London. I'm hoping we have some of those. Hey, Wendy. Wendy's my new LinkedIn friend, I think. So let us know where you're joining from. But thank you so much for being here. I'm so appreciative. If you haven't showed up before, it's Real Talk About Race. And what I wanted to do is I'm Dana Brownlee. I'm a workplace anti-racism educator and thought leader. But what I feel we need more of is real conversation. It's that real conversation that I would have with my friends and family or people who are really close to me. You know how when we're at work, we have kind of the work version of it. And then as soon as we get in our car, we put in our headset, we're like, girl, you can't believe what just happened. Okay. He had the nerve to do this. He had the nerve to say that. He needs to understand this. So I want to bring a little more of that, the authentic, real conversation. Thank you. Hey, John, I'm so glad to see John. He's such a great ally and warrior. He's out there with you in Southern California. Amsterdam, welcome,
Oh, Amsterdam. I've
Amsterdam,
been to Amsterdam.
welcome. Let me put some of these people up. I can't pronounce it.
Roberto.
Cuernavaca, Mexico. My husband would get on me about that. He speaks Spanish. Thank you, John. Thank you, Amsterdam. And Wendy's in Florida. We got Akron, Ohio. So thank you guys so much. But that's exactly what I want to do. I want to start to discuss the undiscussables. Oh, how about Decatur? There's Allison Gilmore. I want to start to discuss the undiscussables because how else are we going to move forward? How else are we going to learn? And please keep in mind, I don't come at this from the perspective of I'm the Black woman and I know everything and I'm the authority and you're the, person who needs to do better and be better and I'm cracking the whip. Anyone who knows me knows I'm opinionated. I'm opinionated and I've done my work. So yes, there's a lot that I know, but I'm just one part of the conversation. I can't speak for anybody but me. Certainly can't speak for all Black people, all women, all anything. But I just think the way we move forward is starting to have much more honest dialogue. And so one of he said race conversation. Yes, we're gonna have a race conversation. One of the
What
things
did
that
you
I
think it
wanted
was going to be?
one of the things that I wanted to do very intentionally is bring different perspectives because yes, I'm Black woman, 50, cisgender, heterosexual, Atlanta. So yeah, I have a certain perspective, but I can't speak to the white perspective. I can't speak to the perspective of a white man, a white woman, a Latinx, an indigenous woman. So I want to bring on different people who have different perspectives and have really honest conversation. Now, one of the things that I was very honest about, and if you didn't get a chance to see some of our previous episodes, check it out on my YouTube channel. I had Vanessa Kirkpatrick, who's a white single mom who first wrote to me from Utah. I won't get into that long story, who I didn't know from a can of paint, but she reached out to me on email after I wrote some things in Forbes, and we've built a bit of a friendship, a relationship at this point. And she was my first guest for the first 2 episodes. So she was my first guest. And one of the reasons why she was reaching out to me was to say, I don't have any Black friends. Like I've lived all these years and I've lived in big cities. I went to graduate school at NYU. I don't have any Black friends. And I appreciated her saying that because I think she's not alone. Because when I look at where I sit at 50 years old, and I was thinking about, gosh, I've had a white woman on, of course, many Black people. I haven't ventured out to Latinx or indigenous communities, but because I'm really looking in my own inner circle at this point, I don't have any white male friends. I mean, when I want to go grab a drink, there's nobody in my phone. I don't have a bunch of white men who are in there that I'm kind of cool with and I go grab a drink with. It doesn't mean I haven't had positive relationships. Certainly, I've got lots of work friendships, and oftentimes those can turn into deeper connections. But Jim is the only person that I could think of, Jim, who I hadn't talked to in 20, how long has it been?
Well, a
25
lot.
years?
We email a lot, but we haven't talked live.
Okay, so we probably haven't talked in like 20, 25 years. But Jim was a former manager of mine, former boss, although quickly, we had really a collegial colleague sort of relationship. And he's really the only white guy I can think of where it really did morph from a work friendship to a real friendship, even though we haven't talked in 20 or 25 years. So I wanted to have him on. And also, I wanted to have him on because I think he's a little bit of a unicorn. I think, when I think about all the people that I've, worked with, and most of them white people in the workplace, and I think about all the work that white people are doing right now, not just to be strong allies and actively work against racism, which obviously that's very, very important work, but just to build connections, just to have more diverse friendship groups, just to build those connections and relationships with people who don't look like them. I think back to you, Jim, and it's like for us, it was so natural. It's like we didn't need a class, we didn't need a guidebook, we didn't need anything. We just really, really connected as people. And I think that what happened was a lot of those subliminal barriers that I think that we have, some of those biases that relate to gender and age and ethnicity, I think that we just didn't have those barriers as much. And actually, I probably give you more credit than me. You probably didn't have those barriers as much. And so I think that for us, it happened pretty organically. And I wasn't the only Black person that you were close to. You had Hillary, you had Rob Day, you had, I don't know who else you had. You had lots of Black friends. So Jim, I want to hear from you because there's so many white men who are out there who are looking at you, who are saying, yeah, I want to have more diversity. I want to feel like I've got these great collegial relationships with people who don't look like me, but it doesn't feel as natural for me. So I want you to just take a minute or two to just share, introduce yourself, and give us some feedback in terms of why you feel that was natural for you, why that wasn't a big deal.
Well, I mean, I thought about when you asked me about that initially, and then I'm thinking like I didn't know any other way. So I'm trying to think as like, how would I reacted differently? So why were you comfortable with me? Because like
that's a great question. That is a absolutely great question. I think that for Black people, it's very different because we're used to being in majority white environments. So, for example, when I was in school and I was in like the gifted classes, the AP classes, there were only like three Black people in all the AP classes. So we're used to that. One of the reasons why I went to Spelman, I wanted to go to a historically Black college and university, is because I didn't want to feel like the other. I'd spent my entire life pretty much being one of only a handful of Black people. So we get tons of practice. It's so funny you say that because Vanessa, I'm wondering if Vanessa's on. Vanessa, let me know if you're here. The white woman from Utah who reached out to me.
I remember.
She asked me, she said, well, do you want to get more white friends? And it was so interesting. First of all, I'm open to anybody being my friend. If we have things in common, I'm open to anybody. But I think the difference, and again, I can only speak for myself, but I think the difference for me from where I'm coming from is my whole life is practice in being around white people. So we're so forced to be around white people. We're so dipped in being around white people that I think for us, we don't have that urge. We don't that maybe she might have had. She feels like she notices, wow, I don't have any Black friends. And so for her, it feels like a void. For me, it doesn't feel as much of a void. And I think that that's part of the reason why. Even though obviously I want to have great friendships and relationships with everybody. And let us know what you think in the comments, because I really would love to put up some other comments about what other people think. But so Jim, for you, why do you think it would, because it is unique. Do you think that most white men have like lots of black women as friends?
I mean, until you told me about this, I didn't think other people would think differently.
Yeah.
So like I grew up in a very small town in Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania, like 3,000 people. And like you said, in my elementary school and high school, we had 3 black people, and one was my best friend. One guy I ran track with, and one was a girl. And that's all you had in the school. But no one, it was not like they were different. My friend, he was the most popular kid. But I thought even more is like when I was little, my dad was a football coach. So when I was a kid, like 4 or 5 years old, I would go to the practices, I'd go on the games, I'd ride the bus, and I would hit, on the team, there would be maybe 25, 35% black, African American. And I would just ride on the bus and I sat with them, and I just grew up with that. So and my parents, I never heard them say anything about any ethnic, thing negative and all that. So it's just how I was brought up.
Right.
So,
and I think that's huge. I mean, you're saying it like, oh, well, whatever. We were around black people all the time. And I sat on the bus with the team and they were my friends. And I think for you, it felt normal, which is great. I wish that's kind of the world we live in, but I don't think that's the normal white experience. I mean, and white people, please tell me, please, let me know. I really want to hear other people, because one of my favorite books, particularly a book to recommend to white people in particular, is Blind Spot. It's written by the Harvard psychologists and scholars who authored the implicit association test. If you're not familiar with the implicit association test, it's the online test that you can take that kind of tests whether or not you have racial bias. And actually, it's not just with race. They have it in, I think they're like 20 different categories of bias. But what it shows is you tend to have a preference to what you're exposed to. And it's called in-group favoritism. So if you're a white person and you feel more comfortable around white people, that doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you normal. If you're a black person and you tend to feel more comfortable around black people because you've been mostly around black people, that is very normal. In this book, they detail experiments that they've done with infants, showing if an infant has only been exposed to its mother, who might be a white female, and then you show it, I shouldn't say it, but him or her, pictures, it tends to show a preference for white female because that's what it's been exposed to. But what's interesting enough, and I really, really want you to read this in the book, it doesn't take that much of an introduction of difference for them to now broaden their in-group favoritism. So it shows in the book how if you just give them exposure, if you expose them to other races, other genders, other styles, other, differences, then all of a sudden they don't have as much of that laser focus of preference for what they're used to seeing. So you're saying it kind of like it's no big deal, but I don't think, you guys, please tell me in the chat, what's common. I mean, I know that we were unique. We were black, our whole family was black, but we were unique in that we lived in a white neighborhood. On one of my previous episodes, I talked about how they had to have a meeting because we were going to be the first black people moving in there. My parents wanted to be sure they weren't going to be like burning crosses on our yard and all that kind of stuff. So I was, not as inundated in a black neighborhood and blackness as I think maybe a lot of other black people were. Julius, awesome. Thanks for joining. So, but I think that most of us tend to live very homogenous lives. It's from an ethnicity perspective. So I do think that that's really different. It's funny because Julie says out here, I think a lot of, I do think an issue is that a lot of white people don't have any real black friends, meaning they've had friends, been over to their house, etc. Julie, that's really an interesting point, because Jim and I were talking before, and I was saying, yeah, I really probably put my foot in it on one of my first episodes, because I said, I've only, and I wasn't including Jim. It's this girl named Heather, this woman named Heather that I went to business school with at Emory, actually. And I was like, probably some of the other white women that I've, hung out with or done things with might be a little bit offended. And I think that this is something I talked about in one of the Forbes articles, 5 Uncomfortable Truths Your Black Colleagues Want You to Know, that oftentimes, I think sometimes white people might think, oh, because we are at the soccer game and we're socializing, we're friends. And I just think that there are levels of friendship. And for me, when I'm saying friend, like a real friend, I mean somebody that I'm calling after I've had a hard day on a Friday and we're meeting for a drink, and, we're not going to talk about work. We're just, talking as friends. And so I do think there's that disconnect, which makes me think of another question to ask you, Jim, is in the workplace. And of course, these are questions we didn't talk about before, so I'll just throw it out there. One thing that I think happens a lot is that people can click up as it relates to race. So as a Black person, I'll just speak for myself. Places where I work, typically you found the other Black people. You would find the other Black people, and then you would kind of huddle together, and you might eat lunch together or do things together. Maybe things have changed, and maybe it's not as cliquey racially as it was when I was back in corporate. But did you notice that at all? Did you notice that we were kind of getting together? And
like, I know with Hillary, you connected with Hillary up front, or maybe we introduced you, I don't know, but I didn't necessarily feel like you were connecting up like that. It just was natural.
Have you noticed it in general? Like,
I think so. Yeah.
Because there's a book that Dr. Gosh, what is her name? Dr. Tatum wrote, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And I think that's one of the reasons why ERGs are so important, HBCUs are so important. And it's not a bad thing, and it's not a negative thing, and it's not that they don't want to socialize with white people, because you're a great example. We were, great friends. We got along really well. And it wasn't just us. It was me, you, Sho, who was Asian, and is still Asian, I'm assuming. And Jeanette was Canadian. Yeah. And Robert, I guess, was just a white guy. And we all got along really, really well. But I still felt that need to kind of get with, Harold and Anthony and, the other LaShanya, the other Black people in the organization. So again, we're going back to, want to talk about racism at work. So one of the questions I want to ask you is, because there are a lot of white people, I think, who feel like, well, the laws are changed. Everything's fair now. Why are we even talking about this? What are your thoughts on that in terms of how does racism show up in the workplace from your perspective? And then after that, I want to drill down a little bit more. I want to talk about a time maybe when you heard or saw something, because see, part of the benefits to having you as a friend was I felt like I could be a little bit of a mole. I felt like you would come back and tell me. Well, also, I felt like you would come back and tell me things that were said in circles that probably wouldn't be said if I was there. One of the things you came back and said one time, I said this to Jim, and he said he doesn't remember it, but he came back one day and he was like, the Black people just get screwed around here, And that was one of the ways I knew we were really good friends.
You'd have to remind me of that. It must have had some incident. I might have said it, but you have to remind me of what that incident was.
So just tell us more broadly, what are your, do you feel like racism exists? How do you feel like it shows up in the workplace? And maybe an example where you saw something, and how did you interject? How did you intercede?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, is that I actually thought of a specific example. So I'll go with that second. But the general one I said is like, I couldn't really wrap my head around, like, can I remember something until I thought of the second one. And in general, what I used the example is that you'll be in a meeting and there'll be, a lot of white people and then a few ethnic people. And someone will say, say the ethnic person says something in the meeting and the people are like kind of like rolling their eyes and saying, well, that didn't make sense or whatever. And then when that person leaves, the comments usually come back. The white people will hang around and say, that was strange. That didn't make sense. And then someone inevitably will say, well, that's affirmative action for you, something like that. They try to dismiss it. Whereas the same thing can happen, and this is just like a common thing that I can hear in some meetings. The same thing happens, and let's say it was like a white person that did it, and after they leave the room, people sit around and say, well, geez, that was silly and that didn't make sense. And somebody say, well, you know what, they got hired is because there's nepotism or they knew somebody. And then the question was, on the first one, say if it was an ethnic group, it could be Asian, African American, whatever. It was more of like, dismiss that person. But for the person who had the connection, it was more of like, okay, how do I get to be their friend so they can help me out? Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, is this kind of thing is that you want to dismiss something real quick. And if it's like blame it on affirmative action, that's like a common type of thing I've seen in the past. And then a specific one, I was trying to remember when I was talking to my friend.
Well, let me just drill down on that for a second, because I think that's really important. So when, let's say, a Black person, I think there was a different example used, but the point is they're assuming that Black person isn't competent.
Exactly. They're
assuming that this person is here because of a program. Exactly. I actually had a very similar incident happen. I'm glad Julie's on. When I was at Emory, when I was in a class about employment law, and I guess we must have been talking about affirmative action. And then a guy sitting behind me was mad because he had been passed over for a promotion, or he didn't get a promotion. And then he said, yeah, and they gave it to some Black woman. And I turned around and I was like, well, maybe she was more qualified. Okay. Maybe she's more qualified. Like, it's really offensive when white people think that anytime you see a Black person in a position of authority, or they get a promotion or whatever, that they got it just because of affirmative action. Those are not the same thing. So I'm so glad that you call that out, because there might be a difference. So let's say there's a white person and they get a promotion, or they get something that might be considered advantageous. And now it's a positive thing of, oh, they've got great connections, I want to get those connections. But there's not this supposition that there's something inherently deficient in that person. And so I think that's a huge, huge difference. And one little clarification, I'll push back on you a little bit, because I think, we all need to share and learn. So ethnic, so use the term ethnic people, okay?
Well, I didn't know how to describe it.
But again, that, sometimes people might, rustle at that a little bit. But, Black people, different racial groups. So somebody of a different racial group. But at any rate, okay, so tell me another example.
Let me applaud you on that, because I think when you hear those things, and I applaud you have to check people. You got to put them check right back. Because if you just let it linger, you're letting it go along. So now you're confident enough, you felt comfortable, but a lot of people aren't, especially like white people are like, oh, I don't want to say this because then, think something, I'll be on the outs. But you got to check,
That is so important. Go ahead.
But it's not, you don't have to like go all in their head, but you just basically say, well, maybe this, maybe that. You just give them alternative views to say, well, maybe that's not what, there's other ways to think about this.
I think that's such an important point, because I did a show, I think the last one was with my husband, Sean. We were talking about racial trauma. And one of the things that I think is never said, but I think needs to be said, is that Black people, and again, I don't want to overgeneralize. I can't speak for all Black people, but this is just my opinion. My opinion is many Black people are not nearly as honest and forthcoming with white people, because there's a fear of what might happen. And I think that there's a long history of that for many, many reasons. So as a result, we don't check people. When I say we, I kind of do, but probably not nearly as much as I could have or should have over the years. But I think that that's something that so many people are struggling with. And that's one of the reasons why my course is coming out in a few weeks, which is how to speak up against racism at work. It really is. It's coming out on LinkedIn Learning. I think May 5th is when the course is coming out. So some of it is a maturity, some of it is a comfort level, some of it is being willing to take a risk. But something that I think is so important is if you already have a relationship with the person, it is so much easier to do it. When I don't have any relationship with you, it's harder for me to jump in there and say that. So funny, we mentioned my white friend Heather, which I need to come up with a better way to refer to her. But I was talking to Heather a couple weeks ago, and she said something. We were talking about something, and I think it was about, I want her to come on and do this show. And she said, what was it? Oh, something about something being blacklisted. And then immediately she caught herself and she said, is that bad? And I said, yeah, you probably, that's not the best term. I said, but I know what you mean. Just keep going. And so that's the other thing, is things land differently for people, I think, based on the relationship you have with them. And we can take race completely out of it. We all know that you can get an email that questions something that you did, but if you're getting it from somebody that you've got a great relationship with, it lands differently for you than with someone that you either have no relationship or you have a bad relationship. So this is one of the reasons why taking the time to try to build connections and build relationships is so critical. So thanks for that. So
and I think, I was talking about, coming on your show today with a friend of mine, and he was telling me that in Irvine, there's this group about getting people together, because it's all about just being comfortable to talk to each other. And not afraid to, if you're transparent, if you don't have like an evil mindset, you're going to be open to constructive remarks, and they'll be open to constructive remarks. So it's all about getting that collaboration and discussion.
Yeah. Did you have another example?
I was trying to think, because I couldn't think of a specific answer, but I remembered one that was really specific. So it was with this Asian guy, and he was Korean, and he walks into the room. He tells me the story, so I wasn't there. He tells me the story. He walks in the room, and this white guy points at him, and he says, "Kung Fu." It's like, what? And he said that, and he said, yeah. And then they were actually making fun of, not him, about this other Asian guy who was gay. And I go, so what did you do? He said, oh, I just went on. You can't go wrong. I go, no. I go, you give me the detail. And I took the information, went right to HR, wrote the guy up, and then HR handled it from there. But that's an example. It's like he was just going to just take it, and do it. And I go, no. You can't let that stand. That's in a workplace, and saying something like that, ridiculous. So that was when I was trying to remember one that was visual, and that one came to my mind as I can still remember that conversation with that guy. He was like nervous about doing it. I said, no, don't, we'll go ahead and handle it.
Right. But I just think that's unfortunately, that's kind of uncommon. I think that in most cases, we just look the other way. And let me just say as an aside, even though I think it's important to speak up and say something, particularly if you're in a position of authority, I also feel like, life is hard. I don't think it's anybody's responsibility to speak up on every single, incident and issue. Trust me, if I got into every social media argument or responded to everything that I saw that I felt was inappropriate, I would have like 5 hairs on my head. So I think you have to still be strategic and careful about how you expend your energy. But it was just really intriguing to me to think about you kind of as a white guy who probably, I would assume, has heard many more racist things than I have, because they're going to say it around you. They're not necessarily going to say it around me. Do you feel like when you have spoken up, like I'm assuming, again, not white, but I'm assuming part of your hesitancy speaking up, or part of anyone's hesitancy speaking up, is you don't want to create friction with that person. So can you maybe speak to that at all? Or how do you feel being the one to kind of say, well,
I don't mind the friction. To me, it's like, you don't want to be friends with those people, so you can give them a chance to educate them, because most people are either, I think Sean said this, or no, your dad said this in his session, is like, he was oblivious to some things, right? You're just not aware. Mm-hmm. And so you give the benefit of the doubt to the person, you kind of check them and say, like, it's not like you're blocking them real hard. You just say, no, did you think about this? Or you give other. I had a friend who he was actually my boss. He was black, and he's probably, if he's listening, he's gonna maybe, because I don't know if I ever told him. And I'll be in a room, and then some other guy will say something, oh, something negative. I go, well, hold on, he did this, this, and this. Did you know that? And then they go, no. I go, well, then why are you just spouting off and just saying things? It's not correct. So you give them a chance to say, you have to find out, are they really racist? Are they just ignorant? Are they oblivious? And let them kind of seek the level. And if they're basically racist, why would you want to interact with them anyway, right?
And that's exactly what I want people to hear. Oftentimes I hear from white people in particular on social media, and the sense I get from them is like, oh, I want to fight for equity, but I just don't know what to do. Like, I want to be a great ally, but I just don't know what to do. This is what you do. Like, one of the things that you do, like moving beyond, people say, hey, I want to move beyond book clubs. This is what you do. When you're in the meeting and you hear, doesn't mean that you have to jump on your high horse and start talking about anti-racism. But the example that Jim gave is such a great example, is that oftentimes what will happen is, let's say a black person is being considered for something, and for some reason they're really being demonized, or they say, well, I don't think he's ready for the promotion. I don't think he's this or that. Or maybe they made a mistake. And instead of it being perceived as a small thing that can be corrected, all of a sudden, he's not ready, and he's probably in the wrong role, and we need to put him somewhere else, or whatever the response is. Having someone in that position of power to be able to say, well, wait a minute, is that the way we dealt with this situation? Or I know he did X, but other people have done X as well. And we were able to send them to training. So maybe training is an option. It's just, we need somebody to step in, to intercede, to question. That's one of the tips I'm going to share in my course. If you feel very hesitant about stepping in and saying something, turn it into a question, okay? Maybe you don't want to say, hey, we don't have any black people on our lineup and that's a problem, but maybe you might ask the question and say, well, gosh, looks like we got a great lineup. I'm so excited about it, but I'm just wondering, I know diversity is so important to us. Do we think we have enough diversity in our lineup? And then you just throw it out there. Then that gets mind shifting and people start to think about it. And maybe you don't have to be the one to push it as much. Maybe we just need you to be the one to throw it out there, to ask the question, to cause them to think slightly differently. Go ahead.
You remind me of, because you educated me, because it's like, my daughter's gonna get mad for me saying this, but it's like, you're telling me about white fragility, and I go, what? I heard that. I can't. It's like one of these things is like, I can't figure this out, and part of it is like, you understand, and I think the issue is in some of these things, the way you phrase about asking a question, it's about basically introducing a concept or a subject without creating this, like, I have to fight this back, right? This what is the word I want to use? This defensiveness. If you spend all your time, you want them to be an ally for you, but you basically say, oh, you have privilege, you have this and that, and then they get all defensive. They might want to help you, but now they're all worried about defending their position. And right. So your approach, I think, is it's like pulling them along with you, then versus pushing them back.
Yeah. And I think that could be a delicate balance. And that's one of the reasons, to be honest, that's one of the reasons why, for me, I'm guarded and I'm careful about where I put my energy. Because there's some people that I'm probably not going to be terribly nice and sweet. And I just don't want to go there. And it's just
you give them a chance, right? You give them a chance. And if they don't, then you basically, okay, I'm done, I'll move on.
Well, it depends on the situation. Like, what I'm thinking about right now is, I've had death threats via email. I've had KKK people, just in general, just from the work I talk about with, and it was so interesting to me. In fact, somebody, Respit just put a comment on here, and I want to talk to you. He wrote an amazing book about racial trauma, and I want to speak to him about that, because one of the things that, again, I'm just so careful with in terms of the I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The guy, he sent me an email. It said white for white. So I've written some article, and it's some white supremacist email that, they're sending to me. And then at the end, he says, you don't deserve to be alive. But what was so interesting about it was, in the email, his whole thing was, about how he's tired of me reminding white people of the history of this country. He didn't use these words, but basically saying, I'm tired of your sticking our noses in. I'm tired of your, just focusing on it. He didn't say anything I said was wrong. So he didn't say anything I said was wrong. He just said, I don't want to hear it. Okay?
I'd like you to invite him on your show, because it's like, what makes him, like, why is he tired? I mean, what's he tired about? I mean, what's he worried about?
No, you got to draw your limit. So for me, like I've got to draw my limits, and I've got to decide where I'm going to put my energy and where I'm not. So somebody needs to talk to him, but it's not going to be me. Okay. So
I'll talk to him.
No, one last thing before we go, because I know we're at 35 minutes. There was one other, a couple things. Once I know there are a lot of white people who struggle with, well, I have questions, but I don't know if I should ask or how to ask. And I sympathize with that, because the last thing a lot of Black people want is somebody who has barely any relationship with them coming up to them saying, well, how do you cornrow your hair? Or, whatever the random, how often do you wash your hair? Or whatever the random, question is. But if you have an authentic relationship that has nothing to do with race, then you can open up and talk about anything. And that was one of the funny things that I remembered from our relationship, was anytime you had a Black question or anytime I had a white question, we would ask. I even remember coming back from Thanksgiving break one time, back when we were in Maryland, at the client in Maryland. And I remember you talking about, well, what did you guys eat? What did Black people eat? And I asked you what you ate, and it was amazing. It surprised me how different it was. Like, to this day, I remember you saying, oh, well, we had this casserole and we had twice baked potatoes. And I was like, we don't eat that. I was like, we had sweet potatoes pie, and we had yams and macaroni and cheese and chicken and collard greens. And, it was fun fact. I did not know what soul food was. When I got to Spelman, they were like soul food restaurants. And I was like, what is soul food? And so finally they took me to the soul food restaurant. I was like, this is regular food. I'm like, this is what we eat like every day or every Sunday. Like, why is this called soul food? But, to me, it was regular. Do you remember that? Do you remember asking me like Black questions and stuff?
I think I remember. I don't know if I asked you, but I always wanted to know about grits. But collard greens, I don't know. I remember you asking about twice baked potatoes, because those are really good.
You remember that? No, yeah. But do you remember you would ask me about like lingo, like
peeps. I remember, like, I was talking to you about these like peeps, and it's like, okay, I can understand where it comes from, but like, who comes up with these things? Like, I want to be able to come up with one of these things. I even just said that today. Is like, how do you come up? Like, where do they come from?
Well, yeah. And actually, I just wrote an article about asking white people to please stop using the term woke, but that's a whole nother issue. Google that if you're interested. Then the last thing I remember was, our team was going to go to a retreat, and it was called Somebody's Plantation. Now, number one, this is a big corporation too. This is a huge Fortune 100 corporation that every single person on this call knows. And we were going to do a team retreat, and they were having, the name of the venue was such and such plantation. So number one, this is one of the reasons why diversity matters, because I almost promise you, if there had been one African-American person at the decision-making table, they would never have proposed that for the larger group, because the person would have elevated their concerns. It would have been clear. I was so offended. I was offended just at the thought of it. And this is like 25 years ago, so I don't remember the detail, but do you remember when that happened, or when I brought that up?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And Jim used to call me Norma Ray. That was the other thing. Yeah. Anything that was going on, Jim was behind me.
You and my daughter, rebel for all causes. It's like, I'm going to put that. That's not going to happen under my watch.
Yeah. That's another great thing in terms of allies, support. Like, have some real support. If there's an issue and I want to bring this issue up, I need somebody to have my back. I need somebody to say, and the reason why it's so helpful to have a white person is, unfortunately, we have that fear that again, I'm going to get labeled the angry black woman, or, somebody will say I'm playing the race card. So if I have a white guy here with me who's stepping up, who's saying, no, I think it's offensive, the whole concept of going to a plantation. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and you and I talked about this, is that sometimes I can see some white people afraid to, like, oh, I don't want to do this, I'm afraid. And so that's why I said, my wife does CBT training, cognitive behavioral therapy training. And I think if people just like, when something is inappropriate, like I just read yesterday, this guy, a coach from Baylor. Did you read the article about the coach from Baylor was given a truck? They won the basketball tournament. It's a Jeep. And the guy who ran the distributor said, hey, this will look good as you pick up some players from the hood. Mm-hmm. And he knew immediately when he said that was inappropriate. So the coach, good for him, he says, I'm not taking it. He didn't take the Jeep. Mm-hmm. So it's like when you're in these rooms and you hear something goes on. I mean, at least for me, something goes on and it's a trigger. You say, I recognize that's inappropriate.
Right.
So now if you're afraid to say something, like in the case of you, where you turned around and you checked the guy right away, but what at least people can start doing is just make a mental note. That's what CBT is. Just make a mental note.
Yeah, just start to say.
Yeah. And then once you do enough of those things, you can have a little tally sheet and say, okay, maybe then you take the next step to be brave and then start doing the things that you suggested about, posing a question or an alternative view, as opposed to going Norma Ray on them right off the bat. You don't have to go from 0 to Norma Ray, but you can take incremental steps.
Yeah, and most of the young people probably don't even know who Norma Ray is. Last thing, Jim, I want to ask you to share is remember you said your friend talked about always clarify your position?
Oh, yeah. That's kind of like what we talked about. So it wasn't my friend. It was a guy, one of our big companies, the boss.
Oh, okay.
And I was young in my career. And I said, hey, do you have any recommendations? Like, what would you, if you had one thing to teach me, what would you teach me? He says, hey, whatever you do, whether it's in conversation or email, especially in email, always clarify your position. So oftentimes, you're in a meeting or an email comes by and somebody's says something that might mischaracterize what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like checking, but it's like you come back and say, no, what I really meant was this. Don't let it linger, because then it comes back and it can haunt you. So perfect example is if I'll get an email and somebody says, oh, this, and that. And I go, should I save this email? Because, I'll respond, should I save this? Because, it might come back and I have to, you have to have your receipts. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So you have, and even if I tell my wife and daughter, it's even if you have to email it to yourself, to another email, you just have a record.
Take a screenshot.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's they think clarify, because you don't want to have something that could later say, well, you never comment about it, so it must be true.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be offensive. Just get yourself back on record for clarity.
And I also think there's an element of this in terms of always clarify your position that can relate to being really clear in terms of anti-racism. And this might be where we pick up with our next conversation. But I've seen this behavior that I call playing footsie with racists on social media. And I think it's counterproductive. Again, this is my view, but I think it's counterproductive. What I see is people are willing to like something, or they're willing to say, yeah, hashtag Black Lives Matter, all that great stuff. But when something is really said or done that's inappropriate, then there's kind of crickets, or they give a response that's lukewarm enough that it doesn't really push back on that person. It doesn't really clarify their position. And those of you who saw the episode with Karen Cisse, we talked about that a little bit. And great thing, Karen is coming back next time. So Karen is just awesome. And she talks about her white friends, and she said they will shut it down. They don't play. I personally feel we need more of that. Now, you can do it in your style. You can have your style, but I so agree with that. When we talk about anti-racism, we need clarity. We really, really do need clarity. And oftentimes, we're too focused on, again, it's like King said in Letter from a Birmingham Jail, focusing on order rather than justice. And what I see is there's too much focus on comfort and not enough focus on progress. And unfortunately, that might mean that some feelings might get ruffled, or there might be some discomfort, but that discomfort, just like when you're going to a therapist, that discomfort is often part of the progress. Like I've said before, when you go to that therapist, they don't have a box of tissues there because they want you to cry. They have a box of tissues there because they know that healing is on the other side of that emotion, and part of the progress forward. If you're going to have real progress, means you might have to confront some things that are uncomfortable. So with that, thank you, Jim.
Thank you. I'm so happy that we did it.
Jim, I miss you, Jim.
I miss you too. I told you I'd do this every day if you want.
So I'm going to have Jim come back. He just has a unique perspective. I can't speak for anyone, but I definitely can't speak for white men.
You asked me a question. I said, have I ever been the only white guy or white person in the room? I go, and I go, no, well, other than like going out of the country. So I said, I want to try that. See what that's, see if I feel any different or something like that.
Yeah, we were talking about white privilege, and I actually had something, I had a little meme that I put out there that said, you probably have white privilege if you've never been the only person of your race in a business meeting, you've never worried about your race negatively impacting a job or a promotion prospect, you've never received a child's reading list or famous people list with no one of your race on it, you never had problems finding a same race Santa at the mall, and you never recall taking pictures down to sell your house growing up or being called the N-word. A lot of privilege is not, sometimes people think privilege, they think it has to be like huge advantage. It's also what you don't have to deal with. It's things that other people might have to deal with that you don't have to deal with.
Hey, did you see that question?
Yeah, sorry. That's why I wanted to bring that back.
That's a good one.
It's difficult to clarify a person when they say things that are inappropriate when they are in a status of leadership. Funny you say that. I actually wrote a book called Managing Up. So I'm a little bit of a specialist on that. How do you suggest clarifying or bringing to their attention that their comments hurt you? That's a wonderful question. I'm going to share a couple comments, and then Jim, just tell me what you think. And I don't have a perfect answer. One, again, this is why relationships matter. If you have a great relationship, it's going to be easier to unpack that and easier to have that conversation. The other thing is I use a technique where you start with grace, meaning you start by a positive assumption. And so it might sound like, hey, Jim, I know, that, we have a great relationship. I'm so grateful for it. And I absolutely know, I just want to talk to you. Obviously, you say, I want to talk to you about something that happened in the meeting. I absolutely know that when you made that comment or when you referred to the Black people as ethnic, that you didn't mean anything by it. I absolutely know that. But I wanted to just share, and some people say you shouldn't say but, and I just wanted to share that I felt a little put off by that, or I just wanted to share that that was hurtful for me. And I think you're honest. I think you honestly tell the person. I think the way you tell the person might differ based on your level of relationship. But what I'm doing is I'm kind of using that sandwich approach. I'm starting with, it's like I'm assuming positive intent, because what I don't want them to do is I don't want them to now put all their energy into, I don't want to hear their racial resume. I don't want them to put all their energy into defending themselves. So what I'm trying to do is diffuse their need to defend themselves. So I want to start with, hey, I know, absolutely know there was no ill intent. Absolutely know that. I know how much you value me. Part of, to me, the benefit of our closeness is that I could tell you something. I mean, I could just, be more honest with you. And so that's when I would just say, hey, when you said that, I did feel a little put off, or it felt a little othering to me. And you might not have been aware of that. So I just wanted to share that with you. So that would be kind of my 30-second response to that. Jim, any thoughts on that?
Definitely you, but I do the other technique is you get an ally. So check your understanding with another person if they were in the room and say, hey, what did you think about this? And make sure, did you misinterpret it? So the other thing that you talked about it, remember we had that one boss and he called it the generosity principle. So always assume the best, right? So I think, talking to that person, but it's important, to document. So plan for the best, but, also plan for the worst, because if you do talk to this boss and she retaliates, you document that I talked to this person here, I talked to this person here. And speaking about clarifying, I got to clarify, check on you, is when I said the word ethnic group, wasn't just a proxy for Black or African American.
Black, right?
It was because I was thinking about Korean and Asian and all that, so I should have said like racial group.
I think the reason why some people take a little bit of offense, just to have a little education point, is it almost and again, I'm just speaking for myself. Other people can tell me what you think. I think sometimes it comes across as like non-white. It's almost like white's the standard, everybody else is ethnic. When really and also using it to describe like people. So, it's not a huge, issue for me. Thanks.
But I'm glad you told me, because I'm aware of that. Oh, one thing too about the lady who talked about her boss. The little, kind of end of the story. Remember the guy who they said Kung Fu, and I went to HR.
Yeah.
So it was all documented. So when he actually was let go, what do you think he got a settlement? He got a major arbitration settlement, because that was documented.
Really?
Yeah. So that's why it's important. You don't know if it's going to come up. Assume the best, but you make sure you're protected along the way.
Well, all right. Yes. Have your receipts.
Yeah,
so again, thank you everybody for coming. Join us first, and we did a different time today, but it's normally first and third Tuesdays at 12 Eastern, 9 Pacific. Next time, I'm going to have Karen back. If you haven't heard Karen, is Karen hilarious, Jim?
She's great. I told you my goal was to, get higher reviews than Karen.
Exactly. It's hard to get higher reviews than Karen.
She's professional. She's professional, though. So
yeah, she's an actress. She's hilarious, and she brings it. I mean, she brings it. I mean, you feel like you're sitting there and we're all having Moscow mules, and you're really hearing the real deal. So, my cousin Mel Noriega, wonderful. Hey, so thank you guys, and please join us next time for Real Talk About Race.
Thank you.